Client-partner relationships and how to avoid them today. This is Ryan Wyse, CEO of Code Koalas.
Well, hello, welcome. Just start with a little bit of background. I started in open source in 2002. Started off as more of a systems administrator, IT guy. And that brought me to 2006 when I got into Drupal and started playing around with it. So I was looking for the best CMS solution. So I looked and played with Joomla and WordPress and Plone, if anyone remembers that. Painful old system. I actually set up a Plone site and regretted it greatly. And then I found Drupal, and I appreciated that all of the modules were free. As opposed to Joomla, it didn't feel like there was a schism between commercial and non-commercial. I really enjoyed from the IT side of things that you could assemble a bunch of stuff and come up with something without a lot of coding, because I had some coding experience at that point, but I definitely wouldn't say I was an expert. And then I worked with Drupal in a couple of companies I worked at, and then decided about 7 years ago to start a company. Which is a crazy idea to do as a developer. Turns out there's a lot more that goes into running a company than just development. So that started in my basement with just me. And that's kind of where the name came from. I'll give you a little bit of cuteness here to start the talk off. So Evie there is the inspiration of Code Koalas. She would come down and hang out with us while we were doing development, which is pretty much all the time. And she would come bring a stuffed koala and hang out, so we went with that. That's why it's Code Koalas. Yeah. So our company now, 7 years later, there's 12 of us. We're in Kansas City. We're development focused, so when it comes to more marketing and strategy, that's usually someone else. So we'll pair up with agencies a lot of time, and we'll bring in the development side of it to get projects done. But we also work with direct clients. We also do some React. We build apps, web apps, native apps. Some of our clients include Hallmark and the National World War I Museum, YMCAs, Populous, and then a bunch of other websites we've worked on that we can't talk about because we work with someone else. So there you go. I've been married for 15 years. I have 5 kids because I don't know how to stop. But I like to think that I've learned a little bit about relationships over those 15 years, and definitely over the 7 years of running a company. This is definitely a perspective of a developer. Becoming project manager, becoming manager, CEO. Another title for this talk could have been 7 mistakes we made, and maybe now you won't have to. So it really comes down to, it says 7 deadly sins, there's really kind of one. There's one to rule them all, if you will, and that is communication. It comes down to no communication and bad communication. And I think if you've read any relationship books, it's the same sort of story over and over again. But it doesn't really help to just say, hey, be better at communicating, right? Because everyone kind of knows like that's the issue and that's what we should solve. So we'll dive into a few different ways that communication breaks down and how to hopefully avoid that. So an example of bad communication from my life, I don't know if this is you, I tend to get focused on whatever I'm doing and time doesn't matter anymore. And it's not that I don't pay attention, I watch the time go by, it's just that all those other things that I was supposed to do just aren't important anymore. And that doesn't bother me. Turns out that bothers my wife. Don't understand why. So we had this issue for probably, well, let's say longer than I'd like to say, where she wouldn't know when I was going to be done with work and be home. Could be when I said, could be an hour, could be 4 hours. Turns out that was a problem. my communication style was to tell her when I had good news, which is I'm getting in the car and coming home. She didn't appreciate that, and I don't understand. I always gave her good news every time I called her. She never knew when I was going to call her. So we came up with a solution to that problem, and that was the solution for a long time, as I actually had an alarm at 5 o'clock every day that went off. And I discovered that communicating what the plan was, even if I was still going to be late, still working on things, still didn't have a great idea of when it would be done, that made things a lot better. And I think the tendency as developers is to get stuck in that it's not figured out, it's not done yet, it's not great, so I'm going to not say anything instead of actually communicating. So that'll bring us to our first sin, the sin of nothing. So it's kind of the way on the developer side how it happens. On the client side, so this is story time. So we had a client, all the clients will remain nameless throughout this. So we had a client full of super smart people working in not our technology side of things, but technology, and so smart that they decided just to teach themselves Drupal. And they taught themselves and they built it and they brought it to us once they kind of hit their limit of what they could do because they weren't actually developers. So we sat down with them and we talked through all of the issues that they had and where they wanted to go. And then we also talked about this big phase 2 that they wanted once we got those little things taken care of, what phase 2 is going to be. So we dove in and we worked and we solved those issues and we worked through them. And the issues got down to just a couple things left that we're solving. And then we tried to talk to them about phase 2. And we just kept getting, oh, it's, we're busy, we're working on things, it's fine, we'll get to that. And so we believed them. Turns out they were upset with the amount of communication they were getting, that they weren't getting enough and they weren't getting it quickly enough. It wasn't until a few months later when I sat down with the leader and talked through the issue that we discovered that. So their way of communicating that was to communicate less and share less information. And that was definitely a learning thing for us, to have people who communicate by not communicating. So it's kind of, you're not allowed to ask me if I'm okay. And so our solution to that has been a couple of things. One, starting to actually read into what people are saying a little more. That there are people who, and it can come from not wanting to rock the boat, not wanting to say that someone's not doing a good job, but they're still frustrated and upset nonetheless, but they don't want to share that. So we're trying to pay more attention to that and communication flow, but then our other way to avoid that is having out-of-band meetings, from lunches with the team or lunches with people who aren't a part of the team, and get that open dialogue going. I was going to say, if anyone else has stories or ideas that they want to contribute, you can throw those in during the talk or after the talk. I would be happy to learn, hey, we've had that problem too, like this, and this is how we solved it. That'd be great. The sin of the missing expert. Where is Waldo? So we encountered this. For us, this most often happens when we're coming into a project that already started and we're helping to take over, or it happens when there's an existing product that needs to be replaced. When you're doing something fresh and ground up, it's a little bit easier. You don't fall into this. So we had a client who came to us. They'd had another development shop build this system out that was running their business. And they finished a few phases, and for whatever reason, they decided to talk to us. So we sat down and we did discovery and we figured out, we went through the technical issues, and we felt like, okay, we understand this system, we can help you. Well, after a few months of working with them, we kind of figured out that they didn't know what the system did or was really doing for them. And we knew we didn't know because we were just coming in. and it was a case of them expecting us to be the everything experts because we were the technical experts. This will cost you a lot of time and spinning your wheels if you don't identify that, at the beginning of the project. And that's the only way to solve this one, is to figure out at the beginning who's the expert and how this is supposed to work and run. And if there's not one, then it's you, or it will be you, if you want the project to run and finish. Sin of money. So this one's a little bit different than you might think. We've discovered that, especially working with large companies and nonprofits, that people have a different concept of money and how it should be spent. And the issue really is, I feel like during the sales process, you kind of figure out, what do they value? Do they value getting it done right and getting it done quickly? Or do they value, let's spend as little money as possible? It tends to be on the nonprofit side that is trying to conserve funds. They're in limited budgets. They can't just go make more money with whatever you're building them. But the biggest issue with this for us has been communicating the customer's sense of money back to the team. Because we've had developers who are working on nonprofits, and they get into that mindset where it's, we need to get as much done for as little cost, and even if it takes longer or weeks, they're okay with that. We've had a lot of nonprofits come to us and say, I've got a great idea, and we need it in 2 weeks. And you're like, okay. You go and here's a rough idea. It's about $20,000. They're like, we need it in 12 months. Can we spread that out over the next 12 months and just kind of make it happen? Whereas some of the larger companies we work with, the cost is not important. It's getting it done and getting it done right. And so the problem is project managers or developers can get into one mindset or the other, and making sure that's communicated how the client feels and what their expectations are. If you have a solution that is twice as expensive but will get it done in half the time, bring that up if the client you're talking to, values that. Sin of complacency. For Arrested Development fans, which I am one, that is a dead pigeon in there. It is labeled dead pigeon. And he looks at it and says, I don't know what I expected. Right. So that seemed appropriate for this one. Complacency. That's really kind of believing that the relationship you have with a client is always going to be the way it is today. It's always going to stay the same. And that's not really true. We've seen a lot of shifts. So I've got a friend who owns a company, and he had this one large client for 10 years that ran a good chunk of his business. And he actually did a decent job of staying in contact with his point of contact and being in regular communication and taking care of them. But he didn't really take the time to innovate and try and think of what other things the company might need or how to take care of them even better than the status quo. And so they got bought out, their client got bought out by another company, and now this steady business that's been theirs for so long isn't anymore. And I think this is easy to happen with clients. It's an easy thing to do, to just get used to how it is and not try and fix that. So on our side, what we try and do is take some time out of meetings throughout the month to talk about, okay, what's going on with this client? What could we do for them? What are some cool things we've learned? And even keeping that conversation open, even if they say no, I feel like creates that value and tells them that you're not just, trading hours for money, right? Big Arrested Development fan. Sin of omission. So we had a client, a huge multinational, who has a division here in the US, and they asked us to build a sales app for them. It was like a simple sales calculator, not that complicated. We pulled together in React. And and we sat down with them. We talked to the person in charge of sales, and we talked to the person in charge of marketing, and even the IT person. We said, here's what we're going to do. They said, great. We went back for a few weeks, built it, brought it back, a couple of tweaks, handed it to them, and then had 6 months of emails back and forth of, could you do it this way, and what about that, and what we found out later was that no one who was in the room could actually deploy an app to the company. That was held back by the, over in Germany, I think. That IT department was the only people who could actually deploy the app. And so this one doesn't really cost you time or money, but it costs you morale of developers, because everything we build, we want to see it deployed and get out and used. And so I've seen this a few times. You deal with people who have a great idea and they want to get it built and deployed, and they don't want to deal with either the bureaucracy or who's in charge of it, and they have enough budget and they can go spend it and do it. So what we've done to try and avoid this is we ask the question at the beginning of a project, who can say no to this? Once we're all done and we're ready to launch and we're going to say, who can tell us no, we can't do it? And that's how we try to avoid that. At least some Parks and Rec fans out there, so that's great. The sin of names. So this is probably more partners than probably agencies that we deal with. But a couple of examples. It turns out if you call something, and someone else calls it something, that's not always the same thing. Agile is one of those things we've discovered. To some people it means, user stories, set sprints, plan it out, get it done. And to other people it means we don't want to plan this and we're just going to do whatever crap we want for a little while. And so figuring out what they mean by agile is helpful. QA is another one. We've had people who, QA means whatever the developer thinks, throw it over the wall to the client. They'll tell us what's broken, we'll fix it and move on. And we've had QA to, in IE9, it's a couple pixels off, so we got to fix that. And so it's important to kind of define that ahead of time. So that's something we try and have longer conversations, especially with new partners and new clients, about what their expectations are. When you talk about QA, when you talk about Agile, what does that actually mean? What is your history? What's your experience in that? Because it's super easy, especially when you're trying to get a sale and you're signing that contract, to say, yeah, QA means QA. What else would it mean? And the last one, sin of deadlines. They're never real. They're never true. We had another client who we did a Facebook integration with. And we went and we figured out how to pull a bunch of stuff, import it, and it worked great. We showed it off. Everybody loved it. A couple months went by while they figured out, when are we going to deploy this? How are we going to do that? And when we came back, one of the Facebook fields wasn't actually importing anymore. Something broke in Facebook land. And so we said, hey, I know you were hoping to roll this out in the next few weeks, but this is broken. There's kind of a dumb workaround we could do, but we should wait. I know you have a deadline. I know you told your bosses it should be then. And they said, nope, we got to deploy it. There's a deadline. And so they rolled it out without that field, and then people were sad because it didn't work the way that they expected it to. And so that's where we've determined that deadlines are never real. They're pretend. There are conferences and things that come up, but it's always, what do you actually need working by this date, and how well do you need it working? So we try and have that conversation with clients up front. We also try and add a 1-week code freeze before we launch things, where we say, great, everybody's happy, it's good, now we're not going to do anything for a week, and if everyone's still happy, then we'll launch it. And then if someone has something in the middle of that week that they need to change, great, the new week starts now. That's hard to get clients to do, but the conversation we try and have is, I know you need this one little tweak and this fix, but when we launch this date, everyone's looking at it. your managers, your board of directors, everyone is going through it. And if we make this one little tweak and it breaks something, everyone in the company is going to be like, that's terrible. Why did you deploy that? But a week after we launch, if we make that tweak and we break it, nobody's going to look and nobody's going to care. So we try and have that conversation, like what's driving the deadlines, what actually needs to be done, and who will be looking at this at that time. So that's the end. If you have any questions, or ideally stories, because stories are great, or ways that you have avoided some of these problems, that would be awesome. Otherwise, thanks.
Any thoughts on how you get clients to respond to emails? If you sent them repeated emails over a 2 to 3 week period?
Yeah, that one's tough.
That's a common problem, right? So how do you? We had that with a client recently that was the work in the scope and the timelines and the amount of effort that was required in our creative process was dependent on the fact that the client had reviewed the creative comps beforehand and had made comments in Envision, which is the tool we use to share and review creative. And the creative review meeting was just to make sure that we understood what all of those things were. What we found is that the client would never look at any of our emails, nor would they look at any of the creative concepts unless we were literally sitting them in the room talking to them. Which, if you think about it, is a much different scope of work, right? So, while as a technologist, it's easy to say that that's the change in scope, and we need to write a change order or change the scope to make it larger so we have more time to build a client for those activities. A lot of times that just doesn't happen because we don't want to make the client mad, or we're working without a signed scope, or some other kind of weird relationship-y kind of thing with the client where you don't want to tell them that. But then it always comes back to bite you in the butt. So for the way that I think that we found that it works best to avoid that is part of that process is documenting the scope of work. And when they don't respond to your emails, then you have the opportunity, and maybe even have certain checkpoints along your project plan when you're doing reviews of documents or just periodic weekly or bi-weekly project plan reviews. You have that opportunity to talk to your clients. It's like our scope depended on you getting back to us in a timely manner, and maybe we weren't really clear about what that meant. It means we need to get back within 24 hours or 2 days, or whatever the case may be. And we're more than happy to wait 3 weeks. But we would need, that's a different scope because that's different work for us, and we need to charge more money, or whatever, or the project would need to take longer. Otherwise, the client is just going to milk it for whatever they want. It's like, yes, that's what they'll give you what they ask for. You'll give them the scope and the bill for what they ask for, and then they'll ask for what they want regardless. So you just have to make sure those two things happen.
So we haven't done this, but I've talked with other agencies and they've implemented like a pause clause with clients.
Yeah.
And that way you have you say, hey, if we don't hear back from you on something for 2 weeks, the project is paused. And it costs $3,000 to start the project up again.
Yes.
And then you can send the email that's like, this is going to cost you money.
Yeah. I've seen that. We've never done it.
We haven't either. I've heard it's worked well for other people.
But I think it's reasonable.
Right.
As long as you have, I think like a lot of the things that you said, we're making sure your expectations are well defined up front. And then make sure that as the project goes along, as those expectations are still being met.
Right.
And if you have a discrepancy or you just have something that you never talked about and just having differing kind of opinions on, or things that you thought were obvious, that you have an opportunity to reconnect with the client and talk to them. Communication.
Right. But our other option on that is to just stick the salesperson back on them. Like, you're friends, you develop a relationship, they're not responding. Go take them out to lunch or coffee or something. And
Yeah.
I think FaceTime is probably one of the most important things with clients in general to talk to you, is actually spend the time getting to know them face to face instead of just emails and phone calls.
Yeah. That's what no one wants to do, but it's always good.
One of the things we found very helpful along the lines of communication is likely the people that you're working with are not the people that signed your scope. And we have very good relationships and communications and things with the people that signed our scope, like our marketing manager or whatever, but we're working with an IT organization to make it happen, something along those lines. And what we found is that what you want in those cases, if it's an IT organization, you want to have your IT guy, or whatever your technical leader on your project, that has a regular phone call. Literally like every week, you just talk to the guy on the phone and say, how is it going from your point of view? Or whatever. Because there's always going to be something weird there between the guy that's responsible and the guy that has the money, or the gal. And the person that doesn't have the money is not paying the bills, did not make the decision, but now he's responsible for it. So they always in a bad situation. So making sure that you have that line of communication and you're constantly talking to that person who's really on the hook for your delivery, or is going to end up being on the hook if you don't deliver. Some kind of situation like that. That you have a good rapport with that person and you're constantly communicating so you can catch problems early.
There's the other thing we read in that negotiation book. It seems more like a nuclear option that you send them an email, have you given up on this project?
Yeah.
Because it was about the psychology of asking them a question that the answer is no. Because people want to tell you you're wrong more than they want to agree. And so you go and be like, no, I haven't given up on this project. I'm on vacation or something.
Another thing that we've done before is, hey, we don't want to spend your money, so we're going to release those developers to go with the other projects, and it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks to get them back when you make a decision. They'll make decisions pretty quick then, sometimes.
Yeah, Never Split the Difference. Highly recommend that book if you haven't read it yet.
Never split the difference.
Never Split the Difference.
It's fun. It just has hostage negotiation stories throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, it's an FBI hostage negotiator. Any other problems you have? Stories to share? Are we good? I will say I didn't bring up some of the actual sins like lying and cheating, but I figured we didn't need to cover those here. Those were kind of my assumed.
Kind of along those lines, we always have to have our eye open for the person that is not genuine about what they're asking for and their intentions for the relationship. We actually had a client, maybe, is that recording? Yeah, anyway, I won't say the details.
There you go, now you can share.
Yeah. We did have a client that actually had a name for the process they used in order to get extra work out of an agency for the money they were paying. They called it pumping them full of water. Not sure where the phrase came from, but they actually had a label for it. And the strategy was that you got a small retainer from the agency to cover like overhead costs or whatever, and then you said you're going to give them another scope for the project work, and then you constantly say, I thought that was included in the retainer. And you can do that a lot until you sign that other scope, and they'll give you lots and lots of free work because they're waiting on the other scope. That guy went to jail. Not for that, but other stuff.
I mean,
That's an interesting
He was
thing,
cooking his
though.
books and things.
With sharing to watch out for is how many different agencies somebody goes through before they get to you. Because if they go through a lot,
They're a problem.
they're doing that.
right.
And you don't want to work with them because it sucks.
Well, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.